Hi, Crystal. It is so good to see you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to see you guys as well.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you on the podcast. For those of you who don't know Crystal, we'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Wow. So, I think like a lot of us, I wear many hats. I'm a mom. First of all, I always say that first because that's really my, priority. So I'm a mom of two kiddos, and they're amazing in their own unique ways. And one of them, my oldest, happens to be on the autism spectrum. So um, she was identified at 3.5, and now she's 12.5. So this has been an amazing journey with her. Um, in my first career, I was a speech pathologist, and so I've been practicing for over 20 years now. But a little after her diagnosis, I pivoted to advocacy and recognized the need for families to have support in this area. And so, special education advocacy, going to IEP meetings, supporting families. I've built a small advocacy group of advocates, and that's what we do here in Southern California, in San Diego.
That is so good.
Yeah, really good. I mean, so you highlighted a little bit that, what started you on this, but maybe you can take us along the journey on where you are now and supporting people with IEPs.
So yeah, I'd always had an interest in autism as a speech pathologist, and of the kiddos on my caseload, those kiddos were just fascinating and just amazing. And then surprise, or not, somebody said, your daughter is lucky to have you. But I think nothing is by accident, right? And so, I believe that God knew I was prepared to be able to support a child like my daughter. And so I've been a speech pathologist, I think maybe about 12 years or so, got married, had kids, had her, and identified early on she was autistic. And took another 1.5 years before she was actually diagnosed. So then at 3.5, we said, okay, this is autism for her, and how do we support her? And so I'd always, as a district employee, wanted to help parents, but there's only a certain degree that you can do. And I think you could probably attest to this, right? As an employee, you only have so much time, and you only have such certain capacity as an employee to help families. So I started thinking, wow, what could I do? Because if I didn't know what I knew, I would be overwhelmed and all the things. And so I thought there's got to be a way to help more families who are feeling like this. And so little by little, while still working as a speech pathologist part-time, I started exploring what it could look like to help families and advocate. And just help like a neighbor who had a kid who was autistic. And she's like, Crystal, I don't know what to do. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, and you would pay me to help you? It's like, this is
Yeah.
do this all day. So, I think she paid me like $50, some ridiculous,
Right.
just whatever. It was just to wanting to help this family like my own. And so that just kind of grew. And I just started, I don't know, I started, talking at libraries about autism, anywhere anybody would listen, and how to help families. And so that grew. And during COVID, actually, for the second time, I was diagnosed with cancer.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to step out in faith and make this pivot and transition. So I did not return back to my district job. I recovered from cancer and went on full time into the business. And so God's just been growing it, and so now we have 5 employees and helping more families across San Diego County. So it's an amazing, humbling journey.
Oh, wow. Crystal, you are seriously such an inspiration to have gone through that medical journey and be a mom and have that professional background. What a resource you are for families, truly. We're talking today about IEPs and the IEP process. So what are some of the basics that parents should know going into the IEP? And first of all, let's just start off with what is an IEP? And then you always hear this term FAPE. What is FAPE?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. I always like to have us all be on the same page. So it's good to start with the definition. So an IEP, an individualized education program. And that is a requirement under the larger umbrella of our federal law in the United States, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which started in 1975. So as a part of that, now children with unique needs could receive a free and appropriate education, and that is FAPE. And so they should receive a FAPE now, because prior to that, and I have a sister who is in the age before this time. So prior to that, children with unique needs were not educated for free if parents had the means or finances or not, they would be institutionalized. I mean, it was not a good time when it came to parenting a child with differences. But after 1975, that opened the door to free services. So FAPE is what children should receive, a free and appropriate education. And that IEP, that individualized education program, outlines what FAPE looks like for each child, because it is very different. A child, there's 13 different eligibility categories. And so children could be eligible in so many different ways and have different needs that need to be supported in different ways. So that is what parents should expect, a FAPE for their child. What is a free and appropriate education for your child, which could look different than the child who maybe also has the same diagnosis, but could look very different. So FAPE is that free and appropriate education.
No, that's so good. Thank you so much for just starting off with the definition so that families know that haven't yet started into this. We have so many families that their child's just been diagnosed and they're really in those early years, right? But this is coming. So
for sure.
Yeah. And getting into this, like being a parent, what is the advice that you have for parents starting out in the IEP process? And, what should they absolutely do? And then probably also what should they definitely avoid?
That's a great question. And I think we're all learning kind of as we go. But I think one of the important things to know is that parents have the right to meaningfully participate in their child's education. And that is actually a part of this larger federal law. So, Congress, as from 1975, until now, we've had this. And Congress has found that the children who do best in special education have parents who have meaningfully participated. So I really would encourage parents to take that active role. Sometimes it's not the door is not as easily opened to you to do that, but you absolutely, through the law, have the right to meaningfully participate. So I'd encourage parents to do that in the way that works for them. And that is, so many different ways. You can provide a parent input statement. So when you have a child with an IEP, there's a little section in there that says parent concerns. And I tell you, how much can you get in that little, section? I've had teams say, well, we can't put that much. It won't fit in the box. It's like, really? So an outline, really almost like a vision statement, and if we think about, what the word says, like, without a vision, the people perish. So, having that vision of what does it look like for your child this year in their education? What are your concerns this year? And outlining that each year. I encourage parents to take time each year to think about that and add that information that is most meaningful to their child and what's on their mind in that section every year. And you talked about some things to avoid. I talk about avoiding being too friendly with the IEP team. And as much as I am such a proponent of collaboration and we have done well in working with a lot of teams, there is a fine line, right? Because education is a business like any other. And it can be difficult if you have become so friendly and Facebook friends and happy hour, all the things with people at your kid's school, and then something occurs. It's hard to say that and stand up for yourself and exercise your rights when you're having to talk to your friend and say that, friend, you're wrong. So we just encourage parents to interact as a collaborative business partner, to keep it on that professional level. You can be very cordial, but not crossing that line, and then not the opposite either with being the bully and, aggressive and name calling. I mean, that's not going to serve you well either. So trying to find that balance, that professional balance is where we try to encourage parents to kind of live in the IEP process.
I love that. I love that you give families a background from which to work from, that sort of mindset going into this. Because I know when we started off, we had no idea what to expect.
Mhm.
And Eric is a teacher in the high school district. And so some of those people were, colleagues or
Right.
who taught their kids or things like that. And so it becomes very complicated. And then I have a background in physical therapy. And so I knew the therapeutic aspects that needed to be there in those IEPs. And so that push and pull that you feel. So I think that's beautiful what you just explained, that mindset of just going in. It's a collaborative business relationship, and you wouldn't choose somebody out in that relationship, and you also wouldn't roll over and say, okay, right? Yeah,
Right.
that is so good. Crystal, as you're looking at creating those goals on the IEP for a child, how can parents know that those goals that the district is presenting are appropriate, measurable, and strength-based? And then what can they do if they believe those goals are not?
That's a really great question. And you talk about strength-based, and that's something that our company has really been diving into this year. We're reading a book around it and really trying to focus our thoughts around a strength-based IEP. And that looks like an IEP that's designed and it clearly explains who your child is now. What are their strengths in this moment? We're not denying that the child has challenges. Clearly they do, or they wouldn't have an IEP. So we acknowledge those challenges, but we focused most of our attention on what are their strengths, what can they do now, and what supports do they need to get them to the next step of what they can do. And I think the goals should also fall in line with that. So, a goal, every goal has a baseline. Is that baseline data current? Have they even looked at how your child performs in this specific skill, let's say, and I see it often where a team would say, whether we want the child to be able to do their, let's say attend to a task for 10 minutes. Well, across 3 days, 100% of the time. Well, where are we now with that? Are they at, 2 minutes, 1 minute? Let's compare apples to apples. So encourage families to look at that baseline. Does it state where they are now? And then in the goal itself, does it explain what supports they need? So, okay, maybe the goal is for them to attend to a task for 10 minutes is it adult support? Is it with visuals? Is it, gestural prompt, whatever they need to get there? I like to see that added into the goal, because we talk about this test of like the novice test. Can any novice person pick up that goal and read it and know how to implement it?
That's so good.
Yeah. If they can't, then we need to more clearly explain that. And maybe it's not measurable enough. Maybe we've just made it too broad. We need to get a little bit more specific.
I really like what you said about starting with their strengths, because I really, as a teacher too, the strengths also are key to where are they motivated. And if you can capture motivation, then you have the student on the right track towards meeting goals, because motivation is the key. Anybody that works with children and especially special needs, that's the key to stuff. So we talked about, kind of putting the goals in place, and those are great on paper, but then how do you keep the teachers and the entire school accountable with that? What kind of systems do you put in place in order to make sure those goals are making progress and moving forward?
Yes, and that's what happens. We work together, we work collaboratively, we come up with this, beautiful looking IEP that meets the child, explains the child well, and then tomorrow happens. This is where I found myself as a district employee, is I would do all the things, put it in place, and then I would walk out of that room and have to go do the same thing with, 50 other kids. How do you really realistically do that? So that is what we talk about with families, is that progress monitoring and the IEP monitoring. It's not just a once a year situation. Legally through IDEA, parents should be getting some level of update regarding the goal progress. So that's a starting point, is, are you receiving that? Are you getting a note about your child's progress towards all of their IEP goals? as often as general ed or neurotypical kids' families are getting report cards and progress reports. So, and if you're not, talk to your IEP team about that. And it even says in your IEP, and most here in California, that parents will be given progress reports quarterly, semester. I mean, it's in there. Now, that doesn't mean teams always do it, but it's in there. So I encourage teams parents to look for that, look for those moments during the school year where the report cards and progress reports are coming. There's also the opportunity to call an IEP meeting at any time. And so if you're having concerns, because children change, they evolve, things happen, maybe new behaviors come up, or maybe they're doing great now because of a therapy or whatever. If you're having questions and concerns that can't be answered by email, it may be time to call an IEP meeting. And that's one way to get those questions answered. And by law, the team needs to schedule that meeting within 30 days of a parent's request. So that's another way to touch base with the team more formally and get abreast of their progress and see how they're doing. And then lastly, we encourage our families, if they're really concerned, especially if they're little guys, preschool, early elementary, to implement home to school communication system. And this too can be added into your IEP as an accommodation that school team will communicate with parents regarding goals to facilitate generalization of skills, whatever you want to call it. And you can spell it out monthly, daily, weekly, through a notebook, a Google sheet, whatever. But adding that again into the IEP so that everybody understands there is that level of accountability. And it doesn't have to always be there. It could be you do that for 3 months or 6 months, or it is there all the time, depending on the kid. But that's another way to be able to get that feedback. And especially if you have a kiddo that's minimally speaking, who can't share with you about what's happening every day. Having that in place can be super helpful.
You know, one of the things that came up as you're talking about it, obviously paper, what's on paper, writing it, keeping up with goals and so forth like that. I'm curious, what would you recommend to parents about actually going in and observing their kid? How would you go about that process? How would you get into the classroom and actually firsthand see what your child's doing?
Yes, that can be very helpful, especially if there's any thought about, behavior or maybe change of placement or, different things that come up during the year. And again, if maybe you have a kid who has, more needs where you really need to see that, eye on what's happening in that moment. So every school, this is not a part of the IEP process, but it can be written into the IEP, but it's not under federal law, IDA. But every school has a system as to how parents can come onto a campus. What you can tie it to is, this is going to allow me to meaningfully participate in my child's education, which is a part of federal law. And so you can make that request and say that you would like to observe. Maybe it's 30 minutes a month, maybe it's an hour, here or there. I've also seen parents have their private therapist come and observe to be able to get a bird's eye view, because sometimes if it's you, the child might act a little bit different, So sometimes that's helpful. You could have, if you have a BCBA or a speech therapist or somebody who could be your eyes in the classroom. So yeah, I would encourage families to have that discussion at the IEP table, or you could have the discussion with the principal about what are the requirements that I need to be able to get on the campus, because I'd like to participate in my child's education this way by observing.
And I would say even more if your child has a BIP, so that because behavior is such a crucial point of that. And some of our kids have, behaviors that keep them from the classroom, and observing how that takes place, and then actually holding the school and the district accountable to, behavioral progress in the classroom.
Yeah, it's important, because if the child has a BIP, they should be keeping data on the behaviors and the supports, and if they're working on all the things it's supposed to be. But sometimes when you go in there as a parent or whoever, your BCBA, whatever, you can see things maybe that they don't see because they're steeped in it. They're the teacher, they're with the kid all day. maybe they don't see that when the light flickers, that's a trigger for their kid. Or, because you didn't answer my child the first time. I mean, like maybe they just are missing those things. So being able to be in that class and see those things, you can often give them insight that's going to help change the trajectory, So yeah, that can be really helpful.
Yeah. You mentioned that giving insight into your child, and we just talked about, sort of setting them up with a knowledge about your child. One of the things that we always did is we would send in a 1-page, summary, and we called it All About Abby. It was kind of catchy. And it had all of her deficits and her strengths on it in all of the different areas. So, motor and behavioral and fine motor and cognitive, et cetera. And that was just so helpful. We give it still to this day to respite caregivers, et cetera. And so I'd encourage that. I think that's a great thing. And then on the lines of the daily log, the daily communication, we typically found that we ended up having to make the page that we wanted to come and back and forth. Do you recommend something like that the parent actually comes up with what they want to see, or they work collaboratively on it?
I think that's great, right? Because teachers are busy. So anything that we can do to help, and it makes it feel a little easier for a parent when it's not like the teacher, they didn't have to go and sit and create it and put it together. Oh, you're giving me so much work. Oh, that's what some teachers might say. So yeah, 100% create what works for you, sharing that with the team in a way that, hey, this is an example of what we're looking for. Feel free to, add to it, change it, but this is an example. I think that would serve you really well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. When you're dealing with an IEP and assessments come up and things like that, right? And then services that are recommended by the school team. What can a parent do if they find that those are not adequate, or they don't believe that the results of those assessments are accurate to their child?
So this is also a part of federal law IDA, is that when parents have a disagreement in any area truly around the assessment, then they have the right to request an IEE. And that's an independent educational evaluation. And under the law, the bar is really low. So you don't have to, do a thesis to explain why you disagree. You simply need to say, I disagree with the district assessment of my child in this area, and I'm requesting an outside assessment, an IEE, at district expense. And it has to be in writing. And that opens the door for the district to pay for this basically second opinion in this area by a professional in the community who has the same credentials as the people at the school. And then the district pays for it, and then the team will listen to the report, and they must take into consideration at minimum the information obtained in that assessment. And so that can be very helpful if there's a level of disagreement, if you feel like maybe they didn't spend enough time with your child, or maybe that was a bad day, or maybe they haven't looked at all the areas needed. Definitely have the right to request that IEE.
That's so good. And are there any timelines involved in that parents should know?
Yeah, that's the hard part, I feel like, because there are timelines when it comes to an IEP assessment. Like when you sign an assessment plan, 15 days, and the team has 60 days to do that. But when it comes to an independent assessment, there aren't those same timelines. So, what we've seen with most cases that have been argued is that 30 days max before a team, a parent can start requesting, hey, we haven't heard back from you. It's been 30 days. We are looking for this IEE. This is going to allow us to participate. So no really stringent timelines under the law, but, at max, I would say 15, 30 days. But most teams, when you make that request in writing, they're pretty good about responding. They should give you a list of contact information of people who can do the assessment in the community. Parents aren't bound to that list, but that's a starting point.
Yeah, that's good advice. As you're going through the education process and you're looking at what the district's providing for your child, if you're finding that you don't think that what they're providing is actually FAPE or appropriate for your child, and you have a disagreement, what process do the parents go about disagreeing with the district and then coming to some agreement on what would be more appropriate?
So there are several options that families have. As advocates, we at least in our company, we really try to bring agreement at the IEP table as much as possible. So, we go through the IEP when a parent comes to us and we analyze it, and we see those maybe 10, 15 things that need to be changed, points of disagreement. And you work toward that at the IEP. It could take 3, 4, 5 meetings to get to some agreement, but sometimes that works, and then you're able to get everything addressed. Or sometimes there's those lingering 2 things that a district is like, nope, we're not going to budge. So if you find yourself in that space, parents have several options. They can file a complaint, a compliance complaint, even within their school district. Every school district has a space to be able to file a compliance complaint. So you could do that. A district employee, but outside of your specific school, will investigate and bring recommendations as to how to resolve it. You also have the options of filing a complaint at your state level. So for us, it would be California Department of Education. You can file a complaint there, where an outside a person will do the same thing, investigate outside of now your school district at the state level, will investigate, and they have 60 days to talk to you, talk to the team, and and they'll provide a report of their findings on how to resolve it. So that's a little less, that's less litigious, less strong, but it does get your needs met, and sometimes that's enough to get those final things resolved. And then moving forward beyond that, if it is such a case where the team is not budging and they're just not going to budge, you may want to talk to a special education attorney and discuss the idea of filing a due process complaint. And that would take your case to a higher level where a hearing officer or a judge will hear your complaint, and they will help you work to resolve that. So. And then there's mediation. There's a little step right behind that. So there's several options. We hope and try to work at getting the most resolved at the IEP table. And in our case, 85% of the time, that's what happens at the IEP table. But there definitely are those times where you're pushing up against philosophy. You're pushing up against, we don't do that here. That's not what we do at this school. And it's hard to fight against somebody's belief.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know people think, well, it's the money. We're not getting this because the districts want to pay for it. Sometimes it's not that. It's just that they don't think that's the right thing to do. And I've seen some districts argue that because that's the way they believe, all the way up to a judge. And it takes that judge to help them see things a little bit differently and open their mind there. So those are the few cases, but parents do have many options.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so good to just, kind of give an overview of what parents might see as they're dealing with a more serious case, right? And maybe what they're up against isn't necessarily a legality, it's a belief system, and that there's things in place to support that. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I think too, the advice of trying to work everything out of the IEP process as much as possible is great. I mean, you can take it up the ladder, but every step up the ladder is more time that's not getting serviced and not getting things that are working to your kids, benefit. And you might win the battle, but you're going to lose the battle in terms of time a lot of times. So you really want to evaluate what's the wise choice to do and what's worth fighting for and what's worth, compromising and coming to some agreement. So.
Yeah, for sure. And we talk about that, the idea of a chess game. I use a lot of analogies. I love words. And I think about special education as a bit of a chess game, and knowing what to do, who to send an email to, when, how to say, what to say, strategic moves, And so one of those strategic moves is offering partial consent for that very reason. So like you just said, Eric, your time is ticking the longer these things drag out. And so maybe you agree to the goals, or maybe you agree to speech, but you don't agree to OT, for example. So you can offer partial consent just to the part you agree to, so that something gets moving. There is some forward movement while you're working out those other areas.
That is so good, Crystal, because I don't think a lot of families know that going into IEPs. They think, it's an all or nothing kind of thing. And so that's super valuable for families to know. And how would you recommend they do that? To attach a separate page? Do they sign off on attendance only? What's the specifics on that?
So, I mean, first you will sign attendance only, and so just that there's a record that you were a part of that meeting. But in offering partial consent, most IEPs have in the consent section a part that says, "I agree" or "I consent to this IEP with the exception of." Some districts will have, "I agree to the IEP in these areas," and you can just literally spell it out, handwrite it, type it. You could even type that on a Word document and have it attached to the IEP as a PDF, the statement of "I consent to the IEP in these areas, ... and not these other areas."
Yeah, that is truly, truly valuable information. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
There's one question we always like to ask our guests, and that is, what's one thing that you would share with families to help bring hope for the road ahead?
one thing.
Yeah, right?
I got a lot of things. I want to say in this now 9 years of navigating as a parent, I would just say that to special education life, right? It's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and to focus on what matters right now. I think as parents, especially when our kids have unique needs, we're thinking 5 years down the road. All the time we're thinking about what ifs, and there is a space to recognize that today, what do they need to work on today? What's meaningful in their life today? What goals are going to matter right now? Let's work on these things. Next year, we can work on the next and the next. I think some parents, we get stuck in just trying to get it all right now, fix it all and do it all right now. That's not reasonable. I don't think God would want you to even try to do that. I think that's not practical. And that brings a lot of stress trying to do all the things, right? So step by step, just saying this year, this is what matters for me, for my kiddo, this is who they are. Let's work on these 3 things or focus on these 3 things. And just know that year by year, you're going to learn more as a parent navigating this road. And when you know better, you do better. Give yourself a break. I think parents too, we feel guilty when we find out something like, "Oh man, I wish I would have known that and I messed up." I have parents say that to me. No, you didn't mess up. You did the best you could with the information that you had. And so now you have new information. Now you make more informed decisions. So give yourself grace and just know that it is a marathon, not a sprint.
So good, Crystal. Where were you when we needed you when our kiddo was little, right?
Oh my gosh.
We are
Yeah.
so blessed by your coming on today and sharing this journey with us and with the families that listen in, and it's just a beautiful thing. You're in our community, you're in the San Diego community. So we highly recommend families reach out to Crystal Sanford and her group. We have all the information at the end in the show notes for you. And Crystal, thank you for coming on.
Such a pleasure. Always a pleasure to be able to, what I say, I'm a hope peddler. I hope to be able to share hope with another family, for somebody to feel like, man, I can do it. Like that makes it all worthwhile. So thank you for this opportunity.
Love it. Thank you. Resources and contact information for today's podcast will be included in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share us with others and be sure to follow us so you won't miss an episode. And we'd love to hear from you, so please leave us a comment or rating and connect with us on social media or on our website at hopeonthehardroad.org.